On today's episode of Athletes Anonymous Presents After the Buzzer, we're going to be talking about a little bit of March Madness, getting into the new CBA for the NBA, and then talking about some of the eliminated teams who are no longer part of the playoffs. Let's get to that intro music. And welcome back to the podcast. I am your co-host, Keone McKeague, and with me, as always, are my longtime friends and co-hosts, and joining us once again, Sir Jalen Holston, Jared Shirai, Nolan Chang. Say what's up to the pod, boys.
Hello.
What's up? What's up?
What is this LSU coach wearing? Is anyone else seeing what she's got on for this game? I mean, talk about making a statement, but honey, that ain't it. That is this is not 1987.
Hi.
Anyway.
I can't say that. I'm paying attention to the fit right now. But yeah, actually, that's a perfect segue into our first topic of the day. Anyway, we're going to be talking about March Madness. Obviously, we have the women's side playing today, so that will be LSU taking on Iowa. And then for the men's side, we do have San Diego State taking on UConn, but I believe that's tomorrow. Is that tomorrow?
Yeah, Monday.
Okay, Raja. Okay, so throwing it over to
when
you
this comes out,
Jay. It'll be this game will be over already. But throwing it over to you, Jay. What have you gotten a chance to see? And obviously, outfits aside, what have you seen as far as the March Madness tournament thus far? Anyway.
Obviously, I was watching my Jayhawks till he got knocked out by Arkansas. I saw a grown man take his shirt off as if he's never won a college basketball game before. But also, I did say heading into that game, no Bill, no win. It's just different when Bill Self was able to be there and make the adjustments needed to win a basketball game. There's a reason he's got multiple NCAA titles. There's a reason why he's been with the Jayhawks, and their program as a whole has just been so successful the last, I'd say, probably 10 years is when it really has peaked since he took over the program. Since he got the job from homeboy at North Carolina. But that being said, I did see that UConn was in it with, the Final Four was the first time I think in men's history that there wasn't a top 3 seed, which is kind of insane when you really think about it. And it really makes you question, is the seeding really that good and accurate?
Why they call it March Madness.
Right? And all that stuff. But after that, I really didn't watch much basketball. And then kind of like a hurricane out of nowhere, this Caitlin Clark girl is what some would call a problem. She is doing just unholy things to these other female athletes in these games, dropping 40 in multiple games. It's not looking great right now, 40. Obviously. But yeah, she set her NCAA record across what is both the men's and women's division for having a 40-point triple-double game. Never been done.
Insane.
Men's or women's. And I feel like there's a good conversation to have about, this being an appreciation for women's sports, and not in a woke sense, in a sense that this girl literally did something that Hall of Famers in the NBA did not do in their college careers. Not Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Pistol Pete, all these great NBA men's players, did not do this. And it kind of caught me off guard in today's game where shooting is so much of a priority, and being able to have these small, these kind of in-between players that are just kind of freak athletes but are good scorers of the basketball, that no one on the men's side had even done it, let alone the women's side. So that has kind of been crazy to me to watch. Obviously, it kind of feels like she blew up overnight. Because I'll be honest, I had no idea who this girl was until she did that, and now
I caught
she
wind of her
did again.
the end of last season. She's a little bit of a name. And then this season, she just took off.
Exactly. So that's kind of where my attention's been. Obviously, I got the game on in the background a little bit. Not looking great, but it's only the second quarter, and it's March Madness, baby. Anything can happen,
Yeah.
So we'll see how this ends up. But yeah, I think regardless of the outcome of this, I think that is a fantastic story for a lot of athletes in general to be watching unfold before our very eyes. And I hope what it means is that by the time she gets to the league, maybe there will be some more conversations about what she can draw and what players like her can draw for the women's side of the NBA. So we'll see.
Very true. Very true. Throwing it over to you, Jared. So in the men's side of the bracket, there are no real top prospects within these last two teams. So we have San Diego State, UConn. There aren't really any notable players. Nobody who's really supposed to get drafted within the lottery as far as like the NBA draft is concerned. Throwing it over to you, do you think that there is something to be said about the success that a team has in March Madness as far as it pertains to to the NBA draft? Or do you think that because of the overhypedness of being, a lottery prospect and all of that kind of stuff, do you think that it kind of falls on maybe more or less like what a team does as opposed to what the player is doing themselves?
I 100% think it's more what the team is doing. Teams get hot, and you don't have to get hot for a certain streak of time, Look at San Diego State. San Diego State, they're having their Cinderella run. Last game they won on a buzzer beater. It's just like the ball falls your way when things are just going right, and it's kind of awesome to see not a top ranked team, not a favorite to win it. I mean, of course I want Duke to be there. I'm sure Jay wants Kansas to be there, but at the same time, it's kind of fun to watch these Cinderella stories.
I want
get all the way
UH to be
final.
there, but
Dude, they got to get to the NCAA.
I wanted
first, right?
UCLA.
Not the NIT, right? We're not getting to the NIT, dog.
Yeah.
No. But for real, that's really what it is when it comes down to it. I think it's what the players do, how big they buy in, how hard they're willing to grit it out. San Diego is down 14, I think.
Yeah.
It
was a big gap.
Last game, It was a big gap, and they just put their nose down and went to work and were able to grind it out and get that last second shot, and it falls your way. I mean, it's like any game. You can put yourself in it to get that last shot off. You never know if it's going to go in or you're going to miss, and you won't know until you get there. And thankfully it got there. There's a lot of San Diego people that we know who are happy for this win. And, it's nice to see a school like San Diego State get to that final and be at that top tier.
I think even that game itself was a testament of schools you wouldn't expect to be in the Final Four.
Oh, FAU. Yeah. Even FAU,
small school.
Yeah.
I literally had to look up what FAU was. I was just like, I don't know what school that is. I was
exactly.
Like, gotcha.
I would say for the game of college basketball, win or lose, it's history for either of those teams making it to the final. So I mean, it's always like a nice thing to see because you don't always, we always complain about it in like the NBA. We don't want to just keep seeing Warriors versus the Cavs every year, like year in and year out. When this March Madness, you get all these schools who are just making differences all the way through the brackets. But,
Was it a Syracuse? Not Syracuse. Who was it in the beginning? Princeton. Princeton was in the beginning, and it goes like that. But I mean, FAU at their statement was great. I mean, I'm sure they really wish they were in the championship game, but they're like, dude, we're just happy to be here.
Yeah,
put the school on the map and just have that Final Four on the resume, and hopefully it'll draw kids to the school. And then now people like Keone know who FAU is, so it's even better.
You're telling me.
So for me, that's what it is. It's just who gets hot in the month of March.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
throwing it over to you, Nolan. What are your kind of highlights, lowlights from the play or the March Madness games thus far?
Kind of mixing the two topics we've talked about already. When you see a team like Iowa for the women's side, you see college teams operate differently because it is systematic. You play through a defensive setting, you play through set offenses. You may have a star players. But they work in conjunction with what the program's kind of operation is.
Yeah.
I think the crazy thing is like Iowa has some decent players, but they let Caitlin Clark loose. Like, do your thing. You can go be that person, be her, and she'll just go off, pull up from the logo. She has that green light. The best part about it is she knows that she's a great scorer, but she knows she can do so much more. And I think they said the last game that she just had, she contributed in some manner to every single point in their fourth quarter. So it's sometimes you see these programs where you can just have this player do their thing, be that star, operate outside of the box whenever they need to. But I think it's more like on the boys' side, you can have a star player that's only going to maybe get 20 points. But a role guy, you can have 3 different role guys who are averaging 8 to 9 points, and that's a great role player for college. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the biggest thing is you see these kind of differences in how certain teams operate to the benefit of their progress, and some to the kind of their cons that make them end up losing the game. And I think the biggest thing was I'm trying to remember the school. Was it FADU that beat Purdue?
I believe it was Florida Atlantic, if I'm not mistaken. FAU.
It was one of the smaller schools.
I think so.
But the coach in the locker room even said before the game, "I hope we get Purdue next because I know how we can beat them." And
I did see that. Yeah, you're right.
And you see these teams where it's March Madness, anything can happen, upsets happen. When a coach knows that maybe a certain style is going to beat another person's style, that's how they can win. With NBA, there's not necessarily a style to each team's game, like barring the Warriors and the Spurs have very specific kind of coaching that goes into how their team plays. But one style can beat another because you're never going to face all these teams in maybe like the 10 years leading up to where you are now in this bracket. And all of a sudden you're playing this team that maybe plays a little differently, plays outside of like the Big Ten conference or something different. And it's any given Sunday, but for basketball. And I think in March Madness, right? Any team can win if they have the right way of coaching against the team or they have the right play style. And I think that's the biggest thing you're seeing in these NCAA games.
Yeah, for sure.
I would argue it comes down to, especially at the collegiate level, it is a showcase for coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't like the NBA is hard to justify like how much coaching is really going on aside from the legends that we know, right? That put in these systems that are world famous, like, the triangle offense of Phil Jackson, that disciplinary system that Pop's got. And then obviously there's a very creative 3-point system that, Steve Kerr has kind of revolutionized in the style of that game and how that's taken over NBA basketball. But at the collegiate level, it is very much a game of chess between these coaches of who can get their team with what they do in the positions to score and win these games. Like Nolan mentioned, the coach might have been excited because he knows exactly how to dissect and get his guys to score against a Purdue or the next big opponent that they're going to face, right? And so I feel like that gets highlighted so much more at the collegiate level, whereas the NBA, we don't kind of get a lot of those stylistic matchups and differences because everybody's just old. You know what I mean? Yeah. You might face a team in college that's more up and down the floor, and another college coach has to figure out, okay, how do we slow down the tempo of the game? Do we go into half court? All that kind of stuff. Like,
and I think that's the big thing because you could name any of the big colleges that have had success. You can be like, oh, what about Duke and Kentucky? And I guarantee you, if you say Duke and Kentucky, the first 2 names that come to you are Coach K and Calipari. Like, it's never like, oh yeah, I remember JJ Redick played for Duke. I remember that Brandon Ingram played for Duke and Julius Randle played for Kentucky. It's always, you think of the coach first because they just have that influx of players coming in, coming out, and what success is because those coaches are there.
And Christian Laettner.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, that is a name that's always recognized. But anyway, I think it's fantastic. We're going to see what happens today as well as tomorrow. By the time you guys hear this pod, it'll already be over. So, let us know what you thought of the games. Anyway, moving over to the NBA side of basketball, we're getting into the conversation about the new CBA that just dropped. For those who are unaware, collective bargaining agreement is what happens when every few years, I believe it's every 8 years or so, the NBA and sort of the players union kind of go over the contract and see what changes need to be made. There were a ton of changes this time around, it's been a while since they've made this many changes in that collective bargaining agreement. So for good or bad, we're going to kind of go down the list here and you guys kind of give me your thoughts on each of these things. So the first one that we're going to go over is that the NBA would now allow players to invest in NBA and WNBA teams. They'll also be able to get into sports betting companies and marijuana companies as far as investments are allowed because it is being legalized everywhere. Kind of throwing it over to you first, Jay. What are your thoughts on them allowing players to be able to invest in all these things?
Bravo.
Right?
About time we get with the times. I still think it's psychotic that the NFL is holding all these the PEDs and marijuana is still listed on that, especially in today's current climate for these professional athletes. I'm glad the NBA was able to kind of understand and recognize the world we live in right now and understand that they have multiple franchises over multiple states, and those laws don't really make sense to apply blanketly across when all of these different places have different regulations on that thing. Yeah. Another big thing I think is great is that they can take stock in WNBA, which means maybe they'll get a little bit more love, and these conversations about equal pay and all those kinds of things will have a little bit more weight and make a little, I don't want to say they don't make sense, because they do, but it's the extent of like, you can't really complain when you literally just don't have the following and the numbers that the NBA does. Like, you can't require and want to have the same types of revenue values that NBA players get from jersey sales and tickets and all that, when you just simply mathematically do not make enough of an, like, that's just where you're at. So maybe that will help with that kind of, leveling out in these female athletes, like what is probably going to be obviously going to be a first rounder with Caitlin Clark, and I'm sure several others of this LSU team that we're watching when they get drafted in the WNBA. Maybe that'll kind of level things out and make some good progress. But I think that's a fantastic move forward for the NBA. Like I said, for a long time, I feel like the NBA has always been 3 steps ahead. Meanwhile, the NFL's bargaining agreement and where the league is at is always 19 steps behind.
Yeah, we're never getting into that conversation. Good Lord.
Yeah.
So many changes to that one.
It's so bad. It's so bad. Yeah. And obviously the NBA's had its lows with its owners and, that kind of thing. But I do think right now the NBA is in a very good spot as far as their bargaining agreements go with the players.
Bouncing off of your point, going over to you, Nolan, marijuana has been added to the list of things that will no longer be tested for in the NBA. On top of the things that I'd already mentioned about them being able to invest, what do you think about the kind of change to now no longer being tested for marijuana and obviously not going to be fined or suspended for the use of marijuana?
I know that they kind of did the soft opening, I guess you can call it, during COVID because they allowed it more recreational.
2021 was the first time that they stopped testing.
So I think that's fine. If it's being legalized everywhere, obviously in your state, if it is something that they do test for, that's probably something that the state has to handle, not your employer, in kind of that respect. It shouldn't be listed on the PEDs, and I'm glad that they moved away from it. In regards to investing, I'm very excited to see how it's kind of handled, because when you look at it from a contractual point of view, you guys get people signing to your team. Now, are we able to lower your pay so that we can give you some stock in maybe your affiliate team or something along the lines of that, or give you some stock in this? Maybe I know that, I don't know if it's Lakers specifically, but we do have like DraftKings as one of the things that we sponsor at Crypto.com Arena. Is that something that a Laker player that's signing with us, hey, we'll give you this for the contract for your base pay, but we're also going to give you this many shares of DraftKings? And all of a sudden you have this money that's passive income, but you're not really affecting the salary cap for the actual franchise team. Now, is this something that's going to be kind of stipulated where that doesn't work that way? Or if it is something, are we able to see more teams pull in players for less money, kind of hurt the luxury or break down the luxury tax a little bit for franchises that are going over a lot? And then now you can kind of bring in more players for different reasons.
Because that is a point later on that we will talk about.
Oh,
that is something that did change.
But I think it's pretty cool. I do want to see how certain things don't get, because I know sports betting is a thing. And obviously we, on the NFL side, we just had Calvin Ridley who got caught for betting. Even though this is just shares in a business, I just don't want to see this kind of get affected where there is that kind of overlap in like what's the difference
the competitive side of it.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, fantastic points. I'm throwing it over to you, Jared. What are your kind of thoughts on those 2 new rule changes? And then I'm going to kind of throw the next one over to you, starting with once you're done with your thoughts for this.
I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with everything that everybody had already said. It's good that they're getting with the times. Marijuana is being legalized everywhere, so it's whatever already. So many people use it. And it's not just recreational anymore. It's literally like they just want you can access it anywhere. Like people just want to use it just because, hey, it's legal now. So I mean, there's no reason to really hold against it unless, like Nolan said, your state is testing for that and something. Then you have to be a little more mindful in that regard. But I'm not opposed to either one of those two things, to be honest.
Right on. Swinging over to the next one. So the new idea of an in-season tournament has been finalized as far as the CBA agreement. So now they will have an in-season tournament starting in November. It'll be So everybody will there will be cup games through the month of November, and then 8 teams will advance to a single elimination final in December, while the other 22 continue on with the regular season. And all games for the tournament will be part of the normal 82 game schedule, excluding one extra game for the 2 teams that make it to the finals. And that game will be held in Vegas, possibly, as of right now, because they do want it to be a neutral location. The prize for winning this in-season tournament is $500,000 per player on the roster. So that is the incentive for the player side. That is obviously kind of the reason why they're going to have it. And because it doesn't really affect the season, minus this one extra game for the finals teams, it is kind of within the season as we play. So throwing it over to you, what do you kind of think of them adding an in-season tournament? And obviously, like, the timing of it is not near March Madness or anything, but it's just something extra added for the NBA. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What are your thoughts?
So is it like designated like for this week, this month? I picked this game to be a cup game and that game to be a cup game, or is it like there's an actual format to it? Because or is it like the Champions League of soccer, or is it like, because I mean, for me, it's like I wouldn't want to play an in-season tournament if all there was is cash reward. It doesn't help me in any playoff stipulations.
Because you said it's part of the 82 game, right? Except
so it's not like they're adding any extra games. So this would be like, think of it as like they're playing these certain games. If their record comes out, whatever, then they continue on to the Final Four, then down to the 2. So those will become the single elimination.
But it does affect the overall season.
Starting with the top 8.
But how does it change in the sense of, like, how do they know what game you're going to play? Like, you have to wait to see, like, so if we're playing the Bulls and we advance, right? And then we play Memphis or something. Like, do we have to wait to play Memphis? Because the schedule's already supposed to be preset from the beginning of the year.
So what'll happen is like the month of November, you'll just play your games as normal. Your record at the end of November would determine your seeding, if you're even in the seeding. And then those 8 teams will have single elimination games for that month of December, which is why the tournament ends up kind of playing out the way it does. So it's basically going to
you like cut out for like a good 3 seconds.
Yeah, it wasn't just me. I was like,
we all looked at each other like,
So it basically is the month of November will be your normal games as normal. Your roster or your record during that month will determine your seeding for the tournament in the next month, and then they'll have like top 8 teams play against each other, the 4 teams and the 2 teams, but it'll all sort of play into, or the schedule will be based around this tournament, so that they won't be adding any extra games outside of if you're a finals team. So
like the actual seeding part of the season will be to be determined on the schedule, and then will that affect future? Because like, how, like, let's say Lakers play the Bulls 2 times during the season, but we play Spurs 4 times during the season. If we end up playing the Spurs in the tournament, does that mean that later on Spurs game is going to be switched to playing the Bulls because now we have to cancel out and make sure you're getting the right amount of games in?
Yeah, it's funny because that is something I don't think they've really necessarily brought out to the public just yet.
And that's where I'm confused with it. That's why I'm kind of like, that's why I've been asking all these questions. Sorry, I know you're not the guy who put this together.
Yeah, no, it's not that. But I was just saying, but as far as like, I think up until that finals game, like everything else will play into the season. So it's not like you're going to play any extra games. I'd assume that the month of November games will be you playing most of the guys from your actual conference, and then conference champs or whatever will end up feeding into the
that actually makes
December game, because I think that's the way it makes the most sense for me. Is if you're winning your conference, then you end up being the top team for your conference and then continuing on. So I mean, it makes sense. There are 8 conferences, right? So if you win your conference, then you end up being one of the 8 for the tournament in December.
Yeah. I think for me, it's one of those, like, money incentive is always great. They always talk about the players don't get paid enough, like, as far as like the lower tier players. So it's always an opportunity for them to win some, But at the same time, it's like, it was already a new thing to put in the play-in games for the playoffs. And now you're trying to add this cup thing. And it's not really a cup incentive, like, for soccer, the Champions League, it's a very prestigious award that you want to win. Of course, it's like, it's an inaugural, like, season tournament that you're going to want to win.
I mean, who knows? Maybe it does end up being.
What does it end up being? I mean, it's so early to tell. And with the questions that we have, I mean, I'm sure players and administration and everybody else having the same kind of questions, and maybe they get the answers behind the scenes. But until we actually get to see it, like, forthcoming, I think then we just have to wait and see what actually comes out of this whole thing. But I mean, if it doesn't affect their season, I don't think it should matter, because you're still getting your 82 games, except for that, like you said, the extra one in the final. It's just the confusion of it all. And then, like, okay, now we're going to play hard because, money's on the line. It's like, why don't you play hard all season? Because a ring is on the line. And that's a bigger, you want to win a ring, unless you get a ring as well from winning this tournament. That'd be kind of cool too. But I'm sure you just get a cup and your money. And
I'm sure they'll add some kind of trophy. There are a lot of legends that have yet to be given, like, a trophy named after them, so I'm sure they'll throw something like that into there. Throwing it over to you two.
Charles Barkley has never won a chip, so they're going to get.
You guys have thoughts on
Wow. It sounds like a desperate attempt to stop the droves of players doing the whole "I'm sitting out because tired" thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it just sounds like a very desperate attempt to get them to not sit out as many basketball games, because these stars are what sells the NBA, right? Like, we go and turn on the TV for LeBron, and if he's like, my toe hurts, I'm sitting out, then we don't get to see LeBron. Durant,
calm down.
Right. But, like, it's not just LeBron. We just like to meme on him the most because he's supposed to be the GOAT.
Kawhi Leonard, come on.
Kawhi Leonard, all the stars do it. And I understand the aspect of load management. I do, but your job is to take care of the body, because that's your whole bit. So, like, if you can't make it an 82 game season without having to sit out games because you need load management, like, what are you doing? Like, that's what I'm saying. So what are you doing is my question. So, yeah, it just seems like a very desperate attempt to kind of slow the pace of that occurring as much in the NBA. I don't know. It just doesn't sound like a great idea, and it's not going to say, I don't know.
Because we're a little pressed for time, I'm going to bounce off that point, throwing this next one over to you, Nolan. They are now changing the rules so that for you to be eligible for a postseason award, there's a 65-game minimum now to be eligible for said awards. So
is
you can no
all
longer
the awards or just the all NBA teams?
All of the awards. So they're changing even the MVP, all those things. You must have played 65 games in the regular season in order to qualify for them. So throwing that over to you, what are your thoughts on them kind of making it so you do have to compete in games in order to be qualifying for awards?
I think it was more of just them being able to put it to paper rather than really making that a specific thing. Because I feel like even when these analysts and coaches and everything vote for the end of season awards, they always take into account if they've missed games for a certain amount of time, right? Like LeBron, he's barely scratched and made the third team all NBA, even though his averages technically are above a lot of the players that are above him. But because of the seasons that he did miss, like 30, 20, 25 games, they can't just put him on first team all NBA. And that makes complete sense. And I completely agree with something like that. I think this was just them putting it to paper to make it seem like, hey, this is where our thought process is. We're not going to just award someone because their averages are great, but they only played 50 games. That just doesn't make sense. And I think that is going to be something that's more important as we come down the line to players who are maybe in line for MVP. for most improved player, for guys who are really sticking it out to make sure that their teams are succeeding because they are on the floor.
Is 65 a good number for you?
Yeah, I mean, we are far past the time where someone playing 72 games was a normalcy. You know, I think, what was it, like, during Jordan's career, he always reached like the 65 game mark or 75 game mark in how many games he played each season. And just like Jalen kind of said, we understand load management, but there's a difference between like really taking care and load managing your body and then just being like, I don't want to play for risk of, you know, high minutes, high risk of injury. I think it is a matter of them making it seem like, and I don't think it's going to affect a lot of these players' mindsets, especially if it's a player who knows that they're not going to be in the running for any specific award by the end of the season. But it is something that I think can help monitor that load management era that we're in.
Jay, did you have thoughts? It looked like you made a face when you
No,
said
I'm not gonna lie to you. The Iowa center just took an elbow to the face, and it did not look good.
Gotcha.
Yeah, sorry.
All right. That is a perfect explanation. Perfect explanation for the face. Swinging it over to the next point, Jared, we're going to talk about. So they have a new limitation for teams that are on the higher spending scale. So for teams like the Warriors, who, you know, going back a little back for when they had Kevin Durant, obviously went way over the luxury tax to make that team happen. So there are new limitations. I'm going to kind of describe some of them per Woj, I believe, who was the one who tweeted this out. Financial changes in the new CBA include a second tax apron that will eliminate a team's mid-level exception when they hit that threshold, and a 20% increase in veteran extension limits, and a third two-way contract via the cap exception. So essentially what's happening is that they will no longer be able to have a mid-level exception once they get to a certain point in their paying bracket. So for a team like the Warriors, who were able to get their 4 stars paid, as well as using the mid-level exception, which was around like 10 mil or so, to get like a guy who, you know, fits in that 10 mil start point, as opposed to just using all veteran minimums. And they do have the option of now adding another younger player with a two-way contract. So basically, they're trying to make it so that a team like that would not happen often. And if it does happen, that they do not have the luxury of sort of signing these sort of mid-tier guys at the same time that they're having, you know, 4 or 5 stars on their team. So throwing it over to you, what are your kind of thoughts on them adding these restrictions? And it's funny because the guy who was the most vocal after it happened was Draymond Green, who obviously was a part of the Warriors team.
Yep.
He does not like the change for obvious reasons. But throwing it over to you, what are your thoughts on them kind of changing this to kind of help with the competitiveness in the league?
I mean, I saw like Draymond's like he's like the players are the ones losing out in a sense, like because they can because teams can build. But I mean, when I hear things about like tax and luxury tax and cash and teams like that, all I think about is the Yankees. First thing that comes to mind is the Yankees. You know, in my opinion, is if you can pay the luxury tax, you pay all the cap and everything, then hell, why not? I mean, it's in the long run, it's only the organization that's technically losing all that money by having to pay out everything. You know. They're trying to build an organization to win. I agree. I like the fact that they're trying to monitor teams and how much they can spend and try to make the league a little fair. But in the long run, I mean, look at baseball, right? The Yankees sign big name every damn year, and they continue to do it year after year. Do they win championships? No. I mean, like in recent years, they haven't won it recently.
Yeah, it's like they won a lot of championships.
They won a lot of championships. Don't get me wrong. But I mean, they haven't won recently, and so with all that money, it's like something cool happened. I know already.
Yeah. we're creeping it. We're creeping it back, baby.
They're climbing back up.
Let's go,
Sorry,
Iowa.
continue. I have the live score just refreshing. Sorry, continue.
No, but yeah, for me, that's what it is. I mean, if teams are willing to pay for it, I get it. But I mean, just because you spend all that money doesn't mean you're always going to be the most successful team out there. I mean, we watched Moneyball for a reason. You know, you looked at teams like that have
it's a real thing
to that the consensus of that's how I have to build my team, and I can still win games and I can still win championships and do things with it. So, I mean, I like that they're trying to monitor it, but at the end of the day, it's not always going to bring you a championship. So if people are willing to waste their money and spend their money in that regard, then go ahead and by all means stop my money getting spent. So I could care less. I got to save my money, we broke over here.
I don't know. I'm going to push back a little because I do think that in the NBA is a little bit different because obviously like those max style players, like the ones like, for instance, like the Warriors who did go out and spend, and in history we've seen teams like them, the Lakers, who are willing to go all out to bring in Dwight Howard and Chris Paul. I think it's a little bit different than those sports that you talk about because having 3 or 4 guys who compete at that level is a little bit different than like a team with like 20 players or whatever, how many players are on an MLB team. Like I do think it's different for the NBA. So
is this them trying to make up for all that then? I mean, in the sense like we talked about the Chris Paul trade last time and how that got vetoed, and then now it's like, we let them build that super team, and so you know what I mean?
I think this is in more regards to what the Warriors did, because obviously that is something that had never been done. You had never had 2 of the top 5 players like in the league being put onto a team and getting paid like, well, I mean, outside of the Lakers, I guess, but I guess like, but I mean, Kobe was still like, you know what I mean? Kobe was still not necessarily there yet when he joined, but in my head, it's more so about that team specifically because they were able to pay each of their top guys, somewhere upwards of 25 mil a year in order to make the team play or put together or whatever. And then they had the luxury of being able to use that mid-level to get guys like Andre Iguodala back and get like other players to kind of flesh out the team that way. So for me, it is a little different with the NBA. But anyway, does anybody else have any extra thoughts on them kind of going in on this like collective bargaining agreement, talking about these higher luxury teams? No?
Seems fine.
I feel like Jay's too.
Let's put some limits
with Caitlin Clark over there.
Let's put some limits on some things. We talk about pro spending a lot, okay? Mm-hmm. Whether it's the NBA, whether it's the NFL, MLB. If you don't put a limit, then like these super teams get made and it's not exciting anymore. So you got to do something here and meet somebody in the middle. That's where I'm at with it. Put limits down. There's a cap for a reason. There's, franchise tagging and all this other shit for a reason. It's to keep the entertainment of the sport at value and the integrity of competition. Like it's not cool to watch a stacked team just roll everybody. Like that's not an accomplishment. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So
I think pointing to those years with the Cavs and the Warriors, knowing for like 8 or 9 years or whatever it was that they were going to be constantly in the finals against each other was really, really boring. Like it really made watching the entire like regular season like not exciting. The next and kind of final talking point I have for you guys regarding the CBA stuff is that the NBA and NBPA agreed on some improved leverage for restricted free agents. So this includes a 10% increase in qualifying offers and shortening the matching period from 48 to 24 hours. So now that, you can't have a team kind of letting that player hang in limbo when they do get their first offer sheet, and they do have sort of like the team themselves have to actually pay more. So actually this kind of feeds into the player league conversation we've had previously here on the pod, putting a little bit more control into the team, to the players' hands as far as their contract or whatever team they're heading for. Throwing it over to you first. I forgot who had the last second, but was it Jared? Throwing it over to you,
I think
Nolan.
I had the last.
Gotcha. I'll throw it over to you, Nolan. What are your kind of thoughts on them kind of giving a little bit more power to players as far as where they would like to be next?
I think that's fine, especially in grand scheme of things. 48 to 24 is not that long in comparison, I guess, overall. But I think it is helpful for the flow of negotiations, for the flow of contracts.
Well, actually, I will say, though, keep in mind that this is during free agency period when that 24 hours, a lot of players can be moved in that amount of time. So I do think that timing wise, that's a significant amount of time to be, going out and finding players.
I mean, overall, I do think it's beneficial though, because you do want things to keep moving. You don't want players, like you mentioned off pod, that you don't want them to be stuck in limbo. I think that's the best part. I think because you especially if it's an unrestricted free or restricted free agent, matching comes into play very often, and we've seen it multiple times where a player has this, they're not willing to offer him the money that he really wants right now, but they're allowing him to get offered from other teams. And then all of a sudden, actually, we do want you, but we're going to decide in a bit if we want to actually take you back. So I think this is very beneficial for that. It also kind of helps. I think it also kind of gives a little bit of like a adrenaline juice into these negotiations, because there's more of a cap for how long it takes for you to give someone an offer sheet and then a match sheet. So overall, I'm with it.
Yeah, with it as well. Going to finish this off with a little bit of conversation about the eliminated teams. So there are 5 teams who are now officially eliminated from the NBA playoffs. We have the Charlotte Hornets, the Detroit Pistons, the Portland Trail Blazers, the San Antonio Spurs, and the Houston Rockets, all removed from contention. Throwing it over to you, Jared, first. What's the team I kind of want you to throw? I'm going to throw the Trailblazers over to you. What do you kind of see as far as highlights and lowlights for the team, specifically what they kind of have going for them and not going for them heading into the offseason?
They have a lot of injuries and everybody's out. So, getting healthy might be the start to them. I think for them, that's a big thing for me. We always talk about health and being able to last 82-game season, and like I'm looking at their depth chart. I put up everybody's depth chart that's out, and it's like Anthony Simmons, Keon Johnson, Cam Reddish, Nasir Little, Jeremy Grant, Yusuf Nurkic, and they shut down Damian Lillard in that as well. I mean, that's all their
literally
guns,
the entire starting lineup.
And exactly, except for Tybal. Tybal is the only starter that is technically healthy. So for them, the good part about this is, there's like 4 or 5 games left. These young kids the younger group gets a lot of minutes, gets a lot of experience. Whether they're playing against top tier teams or teams that are resting for the playoffs, they're getting minutes there. The people that need the rest, obviously getting the rest. So that's great on their part. They have the whole off season, and then going into the off season, they just need to figure out what the hell they want to do. Let's just be real about it. The whole Dame Lillard situation, we don't got to go into that. Like, we already talked about that being a big thing. But getting him some help in the sense of, like, I think they should just trade away Nurkic or try to find somebody Nurkic, to get rid of Nurkic, because, he's not panning out to be anything. There's a lot of players you can move into that position, or just stay with the youth, draft somebody young, and then grow them from that position as well. Kind of like how they did, how the Warriors tried to do it with like a Wiseman or something, So for me, I think the Trailblazers is all about getting healthy and then knowing what identity they want to go with. But it's time to let either Dame go do Dame things, or just get rid of Nurkic, because he was supposed to be his technical help, right? His number 2 in line. So I think that for me, that's where I kind of stand with Portland and where they are going forward. Not saying they had the horriblest of horrible seasons, despite everything they had to go through. Dame had a hell of a year.
Well, having all your starters out is a pretty, pretty big.
At the end of the day, yes, that's literally what it comes down to for me. They had their moments where I thought Portland was gonna do something good with their youngins, and then everybody just gets hurt, and you can't rely on your young group that much to lead you into a tough Western Conference. So, that's just tough on their end.
Throwing it over to you, Jay. I know I'm not going to go over too specific about the team details or anything, but the San Antonio Spurs do still have Greg Popovich, who, as we all know, is one of the most well-known historical coaches of all time. As he's slowly getting his team through this rebuild, and they've obviously tanked very hard to try to get into the Victor Wembanyama series. You got to see a little bit of the highlight that I showed you earlier with his potential of, being a 3-and-D type of guy, but also being, an interior type of guy, and just kind of having the overall length and athleticism. what do you kind of want to see with the San Antonio Spurs as far as like where Popovich is concerned? Do you want to see him still stay there in order to kind of instill what we've all very much known for a very long time, for at least the last 30 years, as San Antonio Spurs culture? Or would you like to see them kind of move on into a new era of like rebuilding with a new coach and kind of getting that all figured out?
This is a hot take, but there is a very trendy women's coach in the WNBA right now. I believe it's the Vegas coach that just put together that fantastic basketball run. I would like to see him move into a mentorship capacity, and I think if they got her with kind of how she felt, like kind of philosophically views basketball, it's very similar to Pop. So it wouldn't really be that big of a shift culturally.
She was his assistant for a while.
Yeah, Becky Hammond.
Yeah, I think moving her in and maybe just see what happens. You're already doing a full rebuild. Let her roll. Let's see what she's got. Because I feel like if you're going to succeed Pop, it should be somebody from his tree. No, it'd be kind of weird to go completely off base from what San Antonio is accustomed to where you still get something very new, obviously, because she's not the same coach that Greg Popovich is. But I do think it's very much the house that Pop built down there, and I don't think you disrespect that by kind of flipping in a completely different direction. A lot of people would argue, LA or Chicago are kind of the houses that Phil Jackson built. So in that regard, so it's kind of one of those things where you got to look at something that's really going to establish and keep that quality that San Antonio's used to when it comes to making a new turn in that direction. And I do think that kid, hey, if you're going to tank for anybody, that guy looked like he could play some basketball. So listen, I get it. Yeah. That's definitely a guy you can build around. You get him some solid twos and a one guard. I mean, that guy's going to be just fine. So
the locked in number 1 overall pick, by the way.
Yeah. So definitely guaranteed to lock in. I mean, that guy inside game, obviously he can shoot the basketball. His size, he's only going to get more, physical. He kind of reminds me of a Kevin Durant situation where he's still got at least 40 or 50 pounds to put on by the time he gets to the league. And all that kind of stuff. So once he gets, going in year 2, maybe year 3, going to be fantastic.
International player.
If he ends up having a freaking Giannis glow up, could you imagine how scary he will be? If he puts on that much muscle, it'll be stupid.
That's the track that I would assume he will probably go on, because I do think he will get bodied early, just like Giannis did when he came into the league. But then, if you put the work in, the results speak for themselves. I mean, that Milwaukee team worked and stayed together and really developed into that championship team, which is why I think they were so celebrated when they won that championship. So I do think that is a track that the Spurs can definitely get on, a very similar track if they make that decision. I just don't see a world where Pop's completely out of their org.
I agree.
You know what I mean? I don't think even if he retires
in some sort.
Something. I don't think if he retires from coaching that he's just going to be
at this point. He should be a part owner,
enjoying himself.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a perfect take. If they end up with Victor Wembanyama and Becky Hammond as head coach, I think sky's the limit for that team. Throwing it over to you, Nolan. We're going to talk about a team you've mentioned before, the Houston Rockets, who obviously are one of those teams that will be rebuilding and hoping for the number 1 overall pick. Some highlights, lowlights for that team heading into next season.
Lowlights are the egos of the players that they have on their team right now. It's a lot of young guns who are getting their heads a little too big because they're producing individually on a shitty team. And I think that it kind of takes away from what you want your team to be. You see these, I'll use the Spurs, for example. You have a lot of young guys, a lot of unfamiliar names on the Spurs. They're not doing well, but they're learning basketball the right way. Now, I don't think I can pin it all on Coach Silas for that happening, but I would not be surprised if he is the first one to be kind of the scapegoat for the team moving forward. No disrespect to him. I think he's a great coach, but as a coach, You got to be good with good teams, and you got to be good with bad teams. And so far, he's not being able to kind of show that with the team that he has now. I do think, highlight-wise, there is promise with a team like this that you can bring in star players. I know we mentioned last pod, hey, I think it would be really dope if they brought in Harden again, kind of to bring him, lead this young group into how they should be kind of handling their NBA careers. You had someone the season before, and I don't even think these issues were really apparent last season, but you had someone like John Wall who knew he wasn't going to be playing at all, but he stuck around to kind of help guide these young guards. All of a sudden he leaves, and this season they're just kind of worried about themselves. You add that in with possibly getting that number 1 lottery pick for Wembanyama. You bring in some star players. Who's the other? We mentioned someone else that could move over there. Oh, Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown decides within the next couple of years he wants to move on. Houston isn't looking like too bad of a spot if the cards fall correctly. But I think highlight-wise, talent is there. Low light, egos, and possibly the departure or letting go of Coach Silas.
Harden, Green, Brown, Smith, and Wembanyama sounds like a hell of a lineup. Just
yep. And Kevin Porter Jr. is someone that you don't have to keep. Yeah. You can trade him, and he has value.
Yeah, that's fantastic breakdown. I was with you. That was a great point. Swinging it over to you, Jared. One of our last 2 teams here. We got the Charlotte Hornets. What are your kind of highlights, lowlights for the team heading into next season? Yeah.
You just trying to set me up with all the injury teams?
Yeah. This really gave Jared a whole lot to work with here, Keone.
I got Terry Rozier, Dennis Smith Jr., Kelly Oubre, Gordon Hayward, PJ Washington, like
LaMelo Ball.
Nobody said the highlights part had to be a lot. You could just mostly lowlights and then sprinkle in some highlights.
I got all the lowlights. I got all the injury guys, you know? I mean, it's the same thing as the trailers, though. 4 of the 5 players are literally injured. 5 out of 5 if you count LaMelo with that, you know what I mean? And it's just tough for any team to be successful in that regard. I mean, the fact that they had a season where is it? They went 26-53. I mean, that's better than all the other teams we talked about except for the Trailblazers. So the 2 most injured teams have the 2 best records. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And you know, it's hard because Melo does Melo things. Like, let's be real. LaMelo Ball is a very talented athlete. He does a lot for that team. Having a guard like Terry Rozier. I think one of the bright spots that I was seeing a lot about was Dennis Smith Jr.
Yeah.
Kind of like a resurgence.
Yeah, a resurgence, a revitalized career.
Had himself a hell of a game against Dallas.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. And that was awesome because that's who drafted him. That's who let him go to New York. After New York, he ends up here, you know, like, it's just like, hey, this is what you let go. But that's what everybody thought he would be. He was going to be that guy in Dallas to be.
He's another. What happened? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, but I mean, he kind of, I was watching a lot of videos and things on him, and he kind of got screwed in a sense. Like, they brought in this, and he went to New York.
Once they brought in Luka, it was over for him. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, but I think this is a great spot for him. You know, Melo's a shooter, but he does like to pass the ball. And you got guards like Kelly Oubre who spots up, and it's just as athletic. Having Gordon Hayward, we always talk about Gordon Hayward, just like you know the way his career has been. So this team has a lot of upside. I think like when they do get healthy and they get their rotations with everybody, and having Melo back as their focal point, and Rozier being the dog that he is, you know, I mean, I think that this team could be a decent contender next year. I didn't expect them to fall this far off this year, to be honest, but I don't think the injuries helped them in any regard. And that's why, you know, it is what it is. But at the same time, I think Charlotte will bounce back from this. We'll see what happens with, you know, with their owner and if they do sell and whatnot. But I mean, at the same time, I don't think that should matter as much as if everybody's healthy and they can still add a couple pieces like on the bigger side of like the ball, then I would say this team could be a contender.
Hot take. If they have one of the higher lottery picks, picking up a player like maybe like Zach Edey from Purdue, just to kind of get that big inside presence, because I don't think they're going to really have a high percentage shot at the top
Wembanyama,
three. Yeah, I don't think they're really going to be up there. And most of it's top heavy in guards for the upper lottery picks. I mean, if you can pick up a guy like Zach Edey and still have that youthful team, I think that could pay off a lot for them.
I agree, and because I think that the teams that are prized more to be in the Wembanyama space need more guards as well. So I think the bigs will fall to Charlotte, and that'll help them out even more. So like, even if you don't get him, there's still a bunch of big men that people are overlooking because they're more guard heavy, looking to recruit in that regard. So
yeah. Speaking of young teams, we're going to move over to our final team, Nolan, with the Detroit Pistons. Obviously, outside of is it Bojan?
Bojan.
Outside of Bojan, it's a very, very young team. What do you kind of see highlights or lowlights for this team as well?
Lowlights is just they need a identity. I don't think that they approached this season with any path that they were really looking at. They were putting a lot of their cards into Cunningham. Unfortunately, he went down with a season-ending injury very early on. They have Bojan, who has raised his stock leading into this offseason. Who I don't know what his contract was for Detroit, but if he's still something that is on their books and he can ship them off, or they can ship him off for,
he got an extension, so he's got 3 more years on his contract.
Yeah. So I mean, he would be good to keep, but you have to kind of really figure out what you're doing, because I believe they have Wiseman now there. Is that
yes, that's their starting.
It's a little bit baby steps. Their team wasn't going to be doing too much, but now, kind of on the flip side of what I just mentioned with the Hornets, if this is a team that has a higher lottery pick, you can actually look at the guards coming out of that draft. Because you have Wiseman, who's having his breakout time now. He's becoming that player that people assumed he was when he was drafted. You have Bojan, who's still there.
Bagley
is kind of coming out into his own again. And then you're going to have Cunningham coming back by the beginning of next season, as well as you have decent guards like Killian Hayes, who's a nice guy off the bench who would get you some assists. He's not too much flashy in anything else, but he's there. So I think that if they can kind of bolster that youth roster that they have now, it can pay off if they can pick up another player who's willing to kind of maybe come lead these guys as a veteran. That's also going to pay off for them. So I think highlight-wise, they have a youthful team that can build into a new identity, but their low light was that they didn't have an identity going this season.
What was the name of the player they traded away to the Hawks?
Sadiq Bey.
Yeah,
that was
a head scratcher for sure.
That was their identity.
Yeah, that was literally good. That was
a
little
3-and-D player.
Yeah.
I thought Nolan was gonna touch on that too. Like, talk about it.
I mean, that kind of plays in. No identity. They just traded him away.
Yeah, we already kind of did talk about that.
Like, honestly, getting a guy like Scoot, if they were to get lucky in the draft lottery, and then adding that to Cunningham, Sadiq Bey, if he were still there, and then Wiseman and Bagley would have been.
Even just getting another shooter like Miller from Alabama.
Yeah, I mean,
it could be nice.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways they could have went, but it is a little weird that they got rid of him. Anyway, I think that'll do it for us here on Athletes Anonymous Presents After the Buzzer. Fantastic conversation going into the CBA. Boys, I'm going to throw it over to you. Where can the people find you? Starting off with you, Jalen.
You can find me on Instagram at @artbyjalen. You can find me on Twitter at Jalen Holston. And you can find me on Twitch at Mogathanos_LGG.
Yes, sir. Moving over to you, Jared. Where can the people find you?
I am on Instagram and Twitch at JShirai, JSHIRAI, and on Twitter at JShirai808.
And for you, Nolan, where can the people find you?
You guys can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch at NolanKYT, NOLANKYT.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch at KONE. That's KAYOHKNEE. And you can also check us out on Instagram at the Poi and Soy Podcast, where we will be posting a lot more reels coming up. And we thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Athletes Anonymous Presents After the Buzzer. Again, it's been a pleasure. It's been a joy from all of us here at Poi and Soy.
Good vibes and love, everybody.
Bang, bang.
Shoots.
America.